In this video, we are going to look at all the skills that you have learned and reviewed in Unit 5 and those specific things that you've learned how to punctuate correctly or how to use correctly in your paper. Now we're going to put them to use in your inquiry report. So we are going to be looking at those transitions, once again, the introductory phrases, dependent clauses, and conjunctive adverbs. We'll look at quotation marks, using direct quotations for titles and words that are part of the topic. And we'll look at MLA citation and what that means for in-text formatting. So let's start with transitions. Remember, there's 3 different types of transitions you can use. Those would be those introductory phrases, dependent clauses, and conjunctive adverbs. So if you want to transition between ideas, you'll be looking at how to add similar information to a point you've already made. Let's say you gave one piece of evidence on why e-cigarettes are beneficial to people, and then you want to add more. You'd need a transition to go from one piece of information that's similar to another. Or if you want to introduce a quotation, and you should always introduce a quotation or a new topic, you would need a transition. Transitions are also useful when you want to show contrast, because remember, with inquiry, you're trying to cover a lot of different perspectives. So those perspectives might not agree, and you might need to transition between conflicting opinions. Or you might need to transition to show cause and effect. In other words, the reason for the second point is the first thing. Or you might need to transition just to summarize a section and move on to the next. So you'll use transitions for different things, and there are different ways you can transition. Those introductory phrases, dependent clauses, and conjunctive adverbs are more sophisticated ways of transitioning between ideas, other than like first, second, next, and some of those very elementary ways. So for example, you can use an introductory phrase to transition. And these are some of the many, many introductory phrases you could have. In the first place, equally important. On this occasion, on the whole, on the other hand, in the same way, because of this, many different phrases you can use. And the thing that you need to remember is that whenever you are using those introductory phrases, you are going to have a comma at the end of it. This allows your reader to pause and say, okay, we've transitioned ideas, now what's the idea? So remember that comma as you're using these sophisticated introductory phrases. You can also use dependent clauses to transition. And if you remember, they start with something known as a subordinating conjunction. And those are the words like after, because, before, if, when, whenever. So for example, say you're transitioning from the idea that some people benefit from medical marijuana but other people don't. You would use a complex sentence with a subordinating conjunction, although, and have a sentence that started, although some people experience pain relief from medical marijuana, and then you'd finish it off another way. Or another example, after she studied the data, this would be a way of introducing a quotation. After she studied the data, Dr. Stallman concluded, and then you'd quote Dr. Stallman. Another example, because PETA research shows that animal abuse is rampant, that would transition from a section where you showed the research to a conclusion. Or, while it is true that most teens benefit from a later start time, this would be qualifying what maybe is best versus what is. And when students procrastinate on a regular basis, or if the public really knew what puppy mills involved, these are all dependent clauses that are used as a transition in a complex sentence from one idea that is in the dependent clause to the next idea that you want to introduce. And so what that will look like is you'll have that dependent clause first, and the most important thing, remember a comma after it, because that punctuates the idea so the reader can get what you're saying. So for example, although some people experience pain relief from medical marijuana, comma, others are unaffected by it. Or, after she studied the data, comma, Dr. Stallman concluded. Or, while it is true that most teens benefit from a later start time, comma, scheduling buses for K-12 students requires earlier start times for high school students. Or, when students procrastinate on a regular basis, that is, when students procrastinate on a regular basis, comma, they begin to lose motivation to continue working. So these are, again, many of the different ways you can use dependent clauses to introduce to change from one idea to the next. Last thing you can use, again, this is more sophisticated transitions, are conjunctive adverbs. These are the things we studied just in session 4. These are many of the following words plus ly words. Lots and lots of different options to show substitutes for and, so, but, and give you a little bit more complexity or depth or maturity to your writing. An example of how you would use those, just a reminder as you punctuate that you would use a semicolon between two separate sentences and commas if you're using a conjunctive adverb within a sentence. For example, sports injuries may seem inevitable given the rough nature of the sports, semicolon, end of that first sentence, conjunctive adverb, however, moreover, likewise, whatever it is, comma, most injuries result from overuse. So this is the pattern that you need to remember if you're using the conjunctive adverb to transition from this idea here in the first sentence to the second sentence. You can also use those conjunctive adverbs anywhere in the sentence, and if you do that, you're going to be sure to put commas around it to offset it, because technically you could take this out and the commas indicate that. So for example, beauty products are advertised with increasing frequency. Sales of beauty products have, comma, therefore, comma, increased threefold in the past decade. So again, conjunctive adverb being used in the middle of a sentence with commas around it, or if you're completing a sentence and you want to start a new sentence, you can use a semicolon, however, or conjunctive adverb and then a comma. So we've looked at transitions, the introductory phrases, dependent clauses, and conjunctive adverbs. That's how you're going to use the skills that you've been studying. And now we'll take a look at quotation marks and how those are used. So let's take a look first at how we're going to use quotation marks for direct quotations. Remember, anytime you use direct exact words from somebody else, you need to put those in quotation marks. And you're going to keep the punctuation inside the quotation marks as is American style. The exception to that might be a question if what you are trying to say is a question and you're just quoting a piece that's not a question. But for the most part, you're going to start with your quotation marks, have a comma, quotation marks, and then the person who said it. That's the general pattern. You can also interrupt the sentence or the quotation with the person who said it. Quotation, comma, quotation, then the person who says it, and continue the quotation with a period at the inside like a basket and then quotation marks. So you're also going to remember to introduce each quotation. You cannot just throw a quotation in there and expect your reader to follow while you put it in there. You need to have some way of introducing it so that it's relevant to the point that you're making. And you need to blend it into your paper, so you might want to use just part of the quotation. So examples of this: a native of Veracruz, Mexico, Santiago said he's reminded of his accident each time he looks at his hands. So this sentence here is introducing the idea that he is reminded of this accident, and here's his exact quotation: I'm never going to be the same, period, quotation marks. So introduce the quotation, who is speaking, why it's relevant, what the point is being made here, and then the quotation. You've got to introduce it somehow. And another example of blending. Sergeant S.J. Olmsted was assigned to the case because county law enforcement, quote, didn't want to deal with it, comma, he said in a 2006 deposition. So in this case, you're just using part of his words, and you just continue your sentence with the quotations in the middle and a lowercase letter here. So again, using quotation marks, you might want to use them for titles. You're probably going to have some websites that you'll refer to either in your citations or perhaps in the text of your paper. You might also refer to media pieces. And those are short pieces that can use quotation marks around titles. So for example, in NPR's program, quote, How to Be a Productive Procrastinator, comma, quote, these quotation marks here are marking the title of the program. Or the web article, quote, The Problem with Circuses, quote, offers a look behind the scenes at the enterprise of Ringling Brothers. So again, titles in quotation marks. And there will be terms that you're using to introduce special topic-related ideas. And in this case, we're looking at artificial intelligence with a kind of a game figure, Mario. And we're looking at the word emotion reservoirs as a special term, and we're talking about those emotion reservoirs, so we put quotation marks around it. And very similarly, in a regular high school environment, there are quote-unquote popular groups and the quote-unquote nerdy groups. And we're talking about these terms as a way of categorizing groups. And so we're going to put them in quotation marks. So we've looked at transitions and we've looked at quotation marks. Now let's review very quickly MLA citation. In-text formatting, you're going to have one in-text or internal citation for each of the 12 pieces of information you're required to have. If you have a direct quotation, you need in-text citation. If you have a paraphrase, statistic, or other piece of information, a fact, you need an internal citation. And the basic format is your quotation or your information, parentheses, the author if you have it, and a page number if it's a book, no comma right here, other parentheses, and the period on the outside. And that would be true whether it's information or quotation you're quoting specifically. If you don't have the author, you're going to take the very first words that appear in your works cited page. So it would be the title of your web article, not the URL, the title of your URL, title of your article. Again, parentheses around it, period at the end. If you want to quote someone who is quoted in another article, and to get the quotations that are required of inquiry style, you'll probably need to do this. The easiest way is to just say the quotation that you want, parentheses, QTD period for quoted in, and then give the author and the page number of the source where you found that quotation, and again, parentheses and period. You're going to use block quotations for any very long quotations, and those would be 4 or more lines of text. So you'd start off with your double spacing here, a colon prior to your long quote, and then you'd bring in your big chunk of text. You're going to actually indent it on this side and indent it on this side, single space it, put a period at the end, and this is the only time the period goes after the text, and then the parentheses, the author, the page number parentheses. So again, for very, very long quotes that are not your own words, you're quoting directly, 4 or more lines, you're going to use a block quotation. So we've covered transitions, we've covered quotation marks, and we've covered MLA citation, the basic things you need to know. Now is your chance to go and apply that knowledge to your inquiry report.